You know Shaletta makes you laugh, but did you know Shaletta Brundage can also make you think and boost your business? Media personality, activist, and comedian Shaletta Brundage founded Shaletta Makes Me Laugh to celebrate and share the best of Black culture. It's a podcasting platform. You can download 10 weekly podcasts hosted by African American subject experts at ShalettaMakesMeLaugh.com or wherever you find your favorite podcasts. ShalettaMakesMeLaugh.com is also a production house, creating broadcast quality commercial content. And Shaletta and her team of storytellers create powerful promotional campaigns to get businesses the brand awareness they're looking for. Some of Minnesota's top businesses trust Shaletta, and you can too. Get out the word about your events and products and get in front of communities of color with ShalettaMakesMeLaugh.com. She's got the power to help your business.
Want your boss to put some real action behind the rhetoric when they talk about making your workplace more inclusive? Find out how to hold their feet to the fire and demand diversity on the Diversity Dude podcast.
Hello there, and welcome back to the Diversity Dude podcast, recognized as one of the top 100 diversity and inclusion podcasts in the U.S. I'm your host, Lambert Fisher, marriage and family therapist, award-winning author, and national speaker on the topic of multicultural awareness and diversity. And whether it be through my one-on-one relationship building efforts as a therapist or my informing and empowering efforts as an author and speaker, know that my personal mission is to do my part to improve the world, one strengthened relationship at a time. Now, today I'd like to share with you a few thoughts about the question, was Karmelo Anthony treated unfairly? So, in recent news, Karmelo Anthony, a teenager in Texas, was recently sentenced to 35 years in prison after he stabbed Austin Metcalf, another teenager, at a track meet. According to reports, Carmelo went underneath another team's tent to supposedly get out of the rain, and Austin told him to leave because he was in an area where he wasn't supposed to be. While the exact details regarding what came next are debated, aggressive talking was followed by shoving, and ultimately, a knife was used to take a life. Now, even with the trial having recently concluded, the debate about the circumstances leading up to the sentence, as well as the court results themselves, continue to be debated in various environments, polarizing friend and family relationships alike. And while I don't claim to have any new facts or evidence to present, I would like to offer a few considerations that may help, at the very least, reduce polarization based on misunderstandings of those having these discussions, or simply having thoughts and feelings about the case and how it impacts them and their relationships. So, with that, here are a few clarified misunderstandings regarding the question, was Carmelo Anthony treated unfairly? Misunderstanding number one. The trial was only about racial bias. Very often, when this case is brought up, it is emphasized that there were no African Americans on the jury. Contrary to many assertions, the jury wasn't exactly 100% white, as it did contain multiple ethnic minorities, including Asian, Indian, and Hispanic. However, many argue that the lack of Black jurors was intentional rather than coincidence, as there were potential jurors who were Black but were excluded by the prosecution. Now, it's definitely unconstitutional to intentionally exclude potential jurors from the jury pool based solely on their race. However, this criterion only requires that another excuse be provided, which indeed was the case, as the prosecution stated that they exclude several Black potential jurors because they were educators and the murder happened on school grounds. And apparently, that was enough for the judge to accept those challenges as valid. For many, however, unfortunate as it may seem, this is valid as a common juror practice. However, for others, looking at studies that show that in jurisdictions across the South, prosecutors strike Black prospective jurors at roughly double and sometimes even 3 times the rate of white prospective jurors, this was less than acceptable. Realities like this make statements about what is common less than reassuring, and not a sufficient indication that situations like this are fair. In the end, the question still remains, would it have made a difference? The short answer is no one knows. Considering what we know about the case, 2 or 3 Black jurors will not have changed the facts of the case or undone the taking of a life. But as it relates to the perceptions regarding how the loss occurred and a perception about what consequences are necessary to hold them accountable, Research would suggest that more diversity of thoughts and diversity of experience that often happens to be correlated with skin tone and experiences in a society may have made a difference. It's not only about race, but the jury selection process and the exclusion pattern make it difficult to support the argument that it didn't play any role at all. Misunderstanding number two: the sentence was only about racial bias. Looking past the selection of the jury, the trial itself, and the concluding verdict, the jury then had the responsibility to determine an appropriate sentence. Their decision? Carmelo Anthony was sentenced to 35 years in prison. Now, whether or not you agree with the guilty verdict, many people have expressed feeling like he got off easy, arguing that the taking of a life deserves much more than 35 years, while many others argue that the sentence was too high. Many support this claim by highlighting that it wasn't premeditated murder. This was a case of boys being physically aggressive. It definitely got out of hand, and a life was tragically lost as a result. Without minimizing the loss of life, they also point to a 2022 legal case of Allison, a white teenager who similarly stabbed a classmate, Joe Ramirez, at their high school. And similar in many ways, especially in the tragic loss of a life, but which resulted in a sentence of 10 years rather than 35 years. More specifically, Allison was charged with a criminally negligent homicide, while Carmelo was charged with first-degree murder, a much harsher charge with stiffer penalties. Again, I'm not here to legally prove either side right or wrong. However, for those who defend the sentence as legitimate, it's worth understanding that many who feel it's unfair are not arguing that Carmelo did nothing wrong, nor that there should be no consequences for his actions. Rather, they're arguing that it appears that the punishment was harsher because of the race of the person who was convicted. They point to the studies that show that Black men are often perceived to be more dangerous than their white counterparts. They also point to the research that suggests that if a Black man and a white man encounter a law enforcement officer, the Black man is more likely to experience aggression than a white man in a similar situation. Not one specific case, but the stats overall support this. If the Black man is even arrested more often than the case, then let's say they're both arrested, the Black man is more likely to get charged. Let's say they both get charged. The Black man is more likely to get convicted. Let's say they both get convicted. The Black man is more likely to get a harsher sentence. And these are just statistics that show that people get convicted and sentenced all the time, but there are higher percentages based on race. It shows that something about the system needs to be changed. Let me be clear. This is not about one biased law enforcement officer, one biased lawyer, one biased judge. Nor am I saying at all that all law enforcement officers, lawyers, and judges are perpetuating this reality. Absolutely not. However, it does reflect a systemic issue that not only needs to be acknowledged in order to be addressed, but it also supports the doubts and the distrust in the system that, without a specific person to point a finger at, has been shown to disproportionately negatively impact Black men, thus making it possible to even agree that accountability is warranted and still disagree about how that accountability is best implemented. Which leads to misunderstanding number three. Race neutral justice is the only thing that matters. Many argue many who argue that the case was race neutral are less arguing that Black jurors weren't excluded. Factually, they were, but more that it shouldn't matter. Everyone on the jury was unbiased, which is not easy to prove at all. Nor are they arguing that the sentence wasn't more than a similar case where a white teen was convicted of a similar act, but are more that every case is different. And the system likely had a good reason for that sentence being different. Optimistic, trust. More importantly for many, however, is that the only thing that matters is that a life was taken and justice needs to be inflicted. Anything said to the contrary to this view is seen as minimizing of the fact that the life was lost, and it seems to be excusing a horrific and unnecessary taking of a life. And to this I say, I can understand that. Life is precious. We should take that into account. We should not take that lightly, nor should we consider our lives or others' lives to be expendable. Doing so, taking a life, understandably has consequences. What those consequences are should reflect the circumstances in which they occur. For example, some argue that this would understandably be different if the loss of life was due to an unavoidable self-defense situation, which to them, this clearly was not. Because his having a knife at school at all proves premeditated aggression and intent to harm, even though everybody acknowledges he had never met this student before. However, many fail to consider that even if they consider this, they fail to realize that it's not a sufficient justification. Many Black men have experienced so much race-influenced aggression and the threat of more in the future, with insufficient support received from coaches, teachers, principals, and even law enforcement, enough for them to trust that if they did need to defend themselves, that they would have ample options other than to physically defend themselves with comparable aggression. This is unfortunately such a constant that some choose to have a weapon to protect themselves, hoping to not need it, rather than to need it and not have it in an environment where they feel is perpetually unsafe. Again, many will argue whether this reality is sufficient to explain anything related to this case. However, acknowledging this reality would at the very least ensure that you're arguing for or against the same thing. With all that in mind, my hope for you is that you will be able to see this case and any others that precede it or follow it with a healthy and balanced perspective. While you can be free to draw any conclusions you may have regarding what the evidence means, whether testimony can be believed, and whether the legal system can be trusted to give people in Carmelo Anthony's situation a fair trial at all. My hope, though, is that you'll be able to see and try to see why people on both sides believe what they do and argue for what they're arguing. Validate that there is a reason for caution and distrust in an imperfect system, even while arguing that accountability for actions is also warranted in some way. You can definitely have a side and hope that your side wins. But where there are opportunities to discover that someone who believes differently than you may not believe so out of a complete lack of regard for you and your entire cultural group, there may be opportunities to share perspectives and conclusions, healthily disagree about facts along the way, and still maintain your relationship moving forward. One way to increase the odds of this is to identify as many similarities as possible in your hopes, your shared hopes for the future, not just regarding justice, fair accountability, and the protection of the value of life for some, but for all of that, for everyone. And with that, I'll say thanks again for listening to today's Diversity Do podcast. If you found it positive and insightful, then be sure to like and subscribe so that you'll know which topics you'd like me to share more on in the future, and share with a friend so that they can be encouraged as well. To find out how you can cultivate culturally safe work environments for you and your team, visit lambertsfisher.com/playbook for a free guide. You can also learn more in my award-winning book, Diversity in Clinical Practice, which offers unique ways to positively address the often divisive topic of diversity, equipping health professionals like you in your efforts to meet the greatest variety of cultural needs possible for those whom you serve. And if you haven't heard it yet, I invite you to visit TED.com and check out my talk called What to Do When You Offend Someone, where I offer a positive and practical perspective on how to navigate unintentional offenses in daily life. To date, it's been viewed over 500,000 times. Check it out for yourself. If you find it encouraging, share it with a friend so that they can be encouraged as well. And as usual, I look forward to addressing as many topics as possible in future podcasts to help you address as many relationships as possible at work, at home, and in your community. And as always, remember this: you don't need to know everything about everyone in order to have a positive impact on someone. Thank you all for tuning in, and have a great day.
Tune in each week and find out how to demand and implement diversity at your job. To hear more, check out previous Diversity Dude shows on ShalettaMakesMeLaugh.com.
Welcome to Old National Bank.
I understand you're all about protection.
Well, we protect you in all kinds of ways, with advanced fraud monitoring and secure digital banking to protect you today, and with dedicated personal bankers to protect your tomorrow.
I'm impressed.
Protection for today and tomorrow.
Could I just...
Oh, go for it.
Old National Bank. Just another reason to get old.
Where'd you get this?
It came with my couch.
Were you counting on a personal care assistant or autism provider who is no longer able to provide services for your child this summer? Don't panic. The Minnesota Department of Human Services just finished an urgent statewide effort to make sure providers of high-risk Medicaid services fully comply with state requirements to provide quality care. The department recently completed a top-to-bottom compliance review of almost 5,600 providers of high-risk services, including personal care assistance and autism programs. If your child's provider was disenrolled, it is time to be proactive. Let me ask you a question. Does your child have a case manager? They usually can help you find a new provider. If your child does not have one, the department will be reaching out to you directly to make sure you know how to find someone new. Understand what's happening and how to get help at mn.gov/DHS/find-care.